The usually laid-back Matthew McConaughey stunned viewers when he erupted live on the Today Show during a tense exchange with host Hoda Kotb, turning what was supposed to be a light-hearted interview into an unforgettable television moment. The segment had started smoothly, with Hoda asking about McConaughey's new film and his passion projects, but the mood quickly shifted when she pressed him on a personal topic he clearly didn't want to discuss. At first, Matthew tried to deflect with his signature charm, flashing that easy grin and tossing out one of his famous, all right, lines, but Hoda kept pushing, her tone growing sharper with each question. Finally, McConaughey's composure cracked. He leaned forward in his chair, his voice low but firm, telling Hoda she had crossed a line, before raising his voice in frustration, the Texas drawl thickening as his emotions spilled over. The studio fell silent, the audience stunned as Matthew, long regarded as one of Hollywood's most unshakable stars, let his fury blaze across the screen in a way no one had ever seen before. Backstage whispers had hinted that Matthew McConaughey had been under immense pressure in the days leading up to his Today Show appearance, juggling press tours, personal commitments, and an onslaught of invasive questions about his private life, but no one expected the tension to explode live on air. When Hoda Kotb pressed him yet again, this time framing her question in a way that suggested he wasn't being fully honest, Matthew's eyes flashed with a mix of hurt and defiance. He sat back in his chair, shaking his head, before leaning in and calling out what he saw as cheap shots dressed up as journalism. The crowd gasped, Hoda stiffened, and co-hosts glanced nervously at the cameras, unsure whether to intervene or let the raw moment unfold. Social media lit up within seconds, clips of McConaughey's fiery words going viral before the segment had even ended. Fans who admired his usually calm, philosophical nature were stunned to see him so visibly angry, while others praised him for standing up for himself on live television. Either way, it was clear that this wasn't just a bad interview, it was a turning point that would be dissected and debated long after the cameras stopped rolling. The tension reached a boiling point as Matthew McConaughey, no longer able to mask his frustration with charm, leaned forward and spoke with a fire that stunned both the studio audience and the millions watching at home. His voice, usually smooth and calm, carried an edge that cut through the air as he accused the show of prioritizing sensationalism over authenticity, of caring more about getting clicks than having a real conversation. Hoda Kotb, caught off guard but unwilling to back down, tried to reframe her line of questioning, but Matthew waved her off with a dismissive hand, visibly seething. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the interview that was supposed to highlight his new project veered into a raw and personal showdown that no producer could have scripted. Some in the audience applauded his candor, others sat frozen in shock, while cameras zoomed in on every flicker of emotion across his face. Behind the glass in the control room, frantic producers debated whether to cut to commercial, but the ratings gold of the moment kept them frozen, knowing that Matthew's eruption had already made this segment one of the most unforgettable in Today Show history. Hoda Kotb, visibly rattled but determined to steer the segment back on track, straightened in her chair and tried to soften the tension with a diplomatic smile, reminding Matthew McConaughey that he was there to promote his work, not debate the ethics of journalism. But Matthew wasn't finished, his eyes locked on hers, with a sharp intensity that left no room for her usual charm. He reminded her, in front of everyone, that his life and struggles weren't tabloid fodder, and that he had agreed to the interview in good faith, not to be cornered about private matters he had repeatedly asked to keep off limits. The studio fell so silent that even the faint hum of the cameras seemed loud, the air heavy with anticipation of what he might say next. Audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing they were witnessing a rare, unfiltered clash between one of Hollywood's most respected actors and one of morning TV's most beloved hosts. Hoda, her composure slipping, attempted to laugh it off, but the sound rang hollow against Matthew's unyielding stare. What was meant to be a breezy, feel-good segment had transformed into a raw and unpredictable confrontation, one that was spiraling far beyond the control of anyone on set. Producers in the control room, their headsets buzzing with frantic chatter, realized the interview was slipping further and further out of control, yet no one dared cut away as the tension between Matthew McConaughey and Hoda Kotb played out like a high-stakes drama. One stage manager discreetly signaled from the sidelines, urging Hoda to pivot to a lighter question, but Matthew, still visibly bristling, wasn't letting the moment go. His voice rose again, louder and sharper this time, as he challenged not just Hoda but the entire culture of morning television, accusing it of masking invasive tactics with a veneer of warmth and smiles. The audience, caught between discomfort and fascination, leaned in as if watching a car crash they couldn't look away from, some clapping in support of Matthew's bold words while others whispered nervously about whether this was the moment the show would cut to an emergency commercial. Hoda, her usual warmth replaced by a measured firmness, tried once more to calm the storm, but the damage had been done. The carefully crafted illusion of easy charm and harmless questions had been shattered. For the first time in years, the Today Show wasn't in control of its narrative, and Matthew McConaughey, with his fury laid bare, had seized the broadcast in a way no guest had ever dared before. As the confrontation reached its breaking point, Matthew McConaughey abruptly pushed back his chair, the screech of its legs against the studio floor cutting through the tense silence like a blade. He stood tall, his face flushed with emotion, and declared that he wouldn't sit there and be treated like a spectacle when he had come to talk about something meaningful. Gasps rippled through the audience as he removed his mic, tossing it onto the chair with a sharp clatter that made the moment even more surreal. Hoda Kotb, still seated but visibly shaken, tried to call after him, her voice wavering as she insisted they could reset and move forward, but Matthew was already striding off the stage, his boots echoing with every step. The cameras tried to cut to a wide shot, but the damage was already done. Millions had just witnessed one of Hollywood's most unflappable stars lose his cool in spectacular fashion. In the control room, chaos erupted as producers scrambled to decide whether to cut to commercial, roll a pre-taped segment, or attempt to salvage the live feed. Meanwhile, social media exploded, clips spreading like wildfire under hashtags like #McConaughey Meltdown and #TodayShowClash. For fans, it was shocking, riveting, and unforgettable, a side of McConaughey they had never seen, and a live TV disaster that would be replayed, dissected, and debated for weeks to come. Backstage, the atmosphere was nothing short of chaos as Matthew McConaughey stormed through the narrow corridors, brushing past startled crew members. Who had never seen the famously laid-back actor so visibly enraged? His publicist trailed behind, trying in vain to calm him down, while producers huddled around Hoda Kotb, who was still seated on stage during the abrupt commercial break, her hands trembling as she tried to gather her composure. For years, she had built her reputation on warmth and poise, but Matthew's fiery departure had left her shaken, her eyes reflecting both shock and regret. In the control room, executives barked orders, demanding an immediate strategy. Should Hoda issue an apology live on air? Should the show spin the clashes, spirited debate, or should they pretend it never happened? Meanwhile, audience members, still buzzing from what they had just witnessed, pulled out their phones to upload shaky videos from different angles, giving the internet even more fuel to dissect the confrontation. Within minutes, news outlets had picked up the story, headlines screaming about Matthew McConaughey's explosive walk-off, and Hoda Kotb's on-air humiliation. What had started as a promotional interview for a movie had become a full-blown media circus, and behind the scenes, the network scrambled desperately to turn a disastrous moment into a narrative they could control. By the time the show cut back from commercials, the world outside the studio was already buzzing with speculation, memes, and trending hashtags, making it impossible to contain the narrative. Matthew McConaughey, meanwhile, sat in the back of his black SUV, staring out the tinted windows with his jaw clenched, as his phone vibrated non-stop with messages from friends, agents, and even fellow actors asking what had really gone down. His manager, seated beside him, urged him to stay quiet, warning that any impulsive statement could either make him a hero or sink his reputation further. Yet Matthew's frustration was boiling over, not just because of Hoda's pointed questions but because, in his eyes, she had crossed a line between journalism and provocation, twisting his words for cheap drama. In the studio, Hoda returned to the screen, her usual bright smile noticeably strained, as she tried to steer the conversation with the remaining guests while ignoring the elephant in the room. Millions had just witnessed one of the most shocking celebrity outbursts in morning show history. Viewers online were split, some applauding Matthew for standing up to what they called media manipulation, while others criticized him for disrespecting a respected journalist live on air. The network's PR team held an emergency conference call, debating whether to issue a joint statement or let the fire burn out on its own. But one thing was clear, this wasn't going away anytime soon. The clash between McConaughey and Hoda had ignited something larger than either of them could have imagined, and by the end of the day, the whole country would be talking about it.